Welcome to Weird Web Radio, an explorer's guide to hidden worlds of the paranormal and occult, reality-expanding experiences, and the downright weird and bizarre. With your host, Lonnie Scott.
Welcome to another edition of Weird Web Radio. I'm your host, Lonnie Scott. On today's episode, we're talking to Aidan Wachter. He's well known in magical, pagan, and occult circles as a highly respected talismanic jeweler. But what you may not know is he's also the author of a pretty badass new book titled 6 Ways. He first encountered the magical arts in 1982, and began seriously studying them in 1987, largely as a method of gaining control over unwanted possession experiences, and we cover that in this episode. He's an eclectic practitioner, having worked with various streams of witchcraft, chaos magic, ceremonial magic, folk magic, and even freestyle sorcery. He's an animist, and his work is spirit-driven and results-oriented. He counts among his spiritual forebears Austin Osman Spare, Rosaleen Norton, Dorji Banzarov, I probably said that wrong, and Jan Fries, or Freeze. We're not sure how to pronounce that. He lives in the mountains of New Mexico with his wife, his cat, several dogs, goats, and a mixed flock of chickens and Muscovy ducks. In other words, Aidan is a pretty incredible guy. I really enjoyed this episode, and I'm not going to waste any of your time getting to it. Just one quick note. If you're on Facebook, like I still am, head over and find the Weird Web Radio discussion group. We're brand new, and it's a way to facilitate conversation a little bit deeper on all these topics, plus all the experiments I'm going to be conducting on live feeds. So, we'll see you there. Enjoy the show, my friends. Stay weird out there. Aidan?
Hello.
Welcome to the show, man. I'm happy to have you here.
Thank you, Lonnie.
Well, I think it's time for you and I to have a conversation about magic, life, and culture. And it's become increasingly obvious to me that the world of the occult desperately needed your voice to be heard. Many people probably don't know that you're a writer. I just don't. They see a lot of your jewelry work, which is amazing. And I don't know how many actually knew that you were going to be writing a book titled, 6 Ways?
Yep.
Approaches and Entries for Practical Magic. How did that come about?
Well, as you know, since we've talked, I wrote a bit on chaos magic in the 90s, early 90s. And kind of the short form is I started writing blog posts, mostly actually about kind of how I made jewelry. And then that shifted in time to covering more magic topics. And I got good feedback from that and started getting a lot of, private messages and interesting comments about my take on magic. So I began talking more about it. And the book really came from that process overall. And then the kind of more specific is I'd written, 20 or 30 pieces that were just chunks of stuff, trying to figure out if I had a book in me, and then ended up flat on my back for a while with an injury, and wrote the bones of the book. Nice.
And before we get too far into your writing, I like to ask a question of all my guests, tailored specifically to each individual. What's one thing that you've come to believe is true about magic beyond skepticism and doubt over the years of your practice?
Oh, for me, it's the totally real, reality of the spirit world. I started there, and I haven't seen anything that's changed that. If anything, it's been cemented way more deeply.
Oh, that's interesting, because you said you started your writing in chaos magic. And
yep.
That's where I cut my teeth too, many, many moons ago. And in chaos magic, they promote maybe spirits as a model, but not something that
perhaps is something that's real that you'll encounter or really matters outside of yourself or your mind. So how do you come to this realization as a chaos magician that the spirits are real?
Well, I found I've had some issues with that aspect of the things that I really love, which is chaos magic, and the Temple of Psychic Youth was my first contact with magic, and they suggested that they were looking for, and this is a paraphrase from memory from a long time, like a modern pagan worldview without recourse to gods or demons. And I never, well, I probably bought that early on, but when I was about 18, I started having possession experiences, mostly located around visits to the Mount Shasta region in Northern California. Is where that started, and had those, and then had kind of what I would call more waking dream experiences, that they weren't outright possessions, but interactions with things that had physical effects, and that were not things that I would, they were generally unrelated to what I was interested in having happen. And so it's not like I was doing magic at that time. More practically, as I got into magic, I thought that it would be a way to get control over those experiences.
Okay. Possession experiences.
Yep.
What does a possession feel like? How do you know that's actually occurring?
In my case, the first time it happened, it was a little more subtle than later ones. And I was in my girlfriend at the time's van. I was talking to her. We were parked up near Castle Lakes, near Shasta. And I became aware that I was no longer, this is a little odd to describe, but I was no longer like seeing out of my eyes like I normally did. It's like I had taken a step or two back. And I could see what the person who was actually seeing from where I normally sat, right? Mm-hmm. I could see that through their eyes. So they had a very different response to my girlfriend and to the surroundings and to even being in the van, it's an old VW bus. And so I could see all of that, but I couldn't interface with my body and with my perception. Like I couldn't look where I wanted to look. He in this thing presented as a male, he had control of the vehicle. And I was definitely in the back seat, just kind of watching. And that one was pretty mild. Later experiences were not mild. And so the one that really is, I realized at some point that there were moments when I was, again, not in the driver's seat, but the thing that was in the driver's seat was really rage-filled and really angry. And this went on for a while, and this is the one that kind of caused me to start practicing magic seriously. Because I was actually concerned that this is like, I wasn't sure whether I was crazy, whether I was a schizophrenic or what was going on that had this level of kind of rage and violence within it that would just appear. And again, my perception was I was watching from a foot behind my normal perception. So
you're not, sorry to interrupt, but you're not creating these experiences, at least at this time. You're just finding yourself in the grip of it.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
And so that one got me really kind of cranking on the magical stuff, because I was concerned that like I could see myself with this thing in the driver's seat killing somebody. and I couldn't get into the driver's seat until it was done, which was generally an exhaustion process. Like me fighting it and its kind of weight on the body was exhausting. And there's a certain level of like physical exhaustion where it would get kicked out, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened is I did in time, I learned how to communicate to that thing and to kind of set up ground rules with it. And we came to an agreement that it's like, okay, your interest is violence. And I don't have that interest around the people that I hang out with, but I'll make an agreement with you that you can be in the driver's seat at any point where I'm actually physically attacked, but I get to decide what happens to the person that does it. And that worked. About a year and a half later, I got mugged on the street. Guy grabbed me from behind and I was gone. I was like literally not present for a minute, and then was dropped back in, and I had him up against a wall. I had the knife that he'd pulled on me in my hand, and this thing kind of essentially standing next to me saying, do what you want to do. I'd kill him. And I remember this guy was horrified because I was having this conversation out loud, I think, at that point. And I said, you don't want to be here to the guy, and let him go. And he ran. And that's how that thing has worked with me ever since.
And you said this was the catalyst for you to begin practicing magic.
Right. That was the serious catalyst. I had an interest in it, but this was the thing that made me go, I got to figure out how to control these experiences.
Sure. All right. So once you start thinking, man, I got to control this stuff, where'd you turn?
I had been looking at Wiccan stuff, the Spiral Dance by Starhawk. I'm sure some Scott Cunningham stuff, though that may have been later. I don't really remember when Scott started. And I knew Thelemite, but he and I had talked I met him when I was 15, and he and I had talked for a few years, but I didn't start practicing back then really. And then I met a guy who, on a bus, who was carrying a datura plant and wearing an Aleister Crowley shirt. And I was like, okay, let's talk to this guy. And it turns out he knew that other Thelemite. And we became friends, and he hooked me up with a bunch of books, one of which was Peter Carroll's book, Liber Nolen Psychonaut, in the old faux leather cover. And I began using that to kind of process through the Crowley and Regardian, the witchcraft stuff. I used it kind of as a tool to filter.
Yeah, that's cool. I kind of did the same thing. I think a lot of us who started, if you started in the late 80s, early 90s, you were going to be exposed to, and Wicca and Crowley. And that was about it. And I remember I was 17, and a buddy of mine handed me Liber Null and Psychonaut, and also Futhark by Edward Thorson about the same time. And the combination of those two books, I guess at just the right time in my life, built this operating system that I've been working with ever since.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I found that I tried to do the ceremonial route. I was a member of the OTO for a number of years and took a number of initiations with them. But the actual kind of Golden Dawn approach never really made sense to me. And aesthetically, my approach has always been what we would now call traditional witchcraft. Back at that point in time, this was pretty much Paul Huson's Mastering Witchcraft was the only thing. But I remember when Nigel Jackson's books came out on Capel Ban publishing. I got Call of the Horned Piper and Masks of Misrule. I ordered those from England. And they came in at the same time. And his aesthetic, I was like, oh yeah, if I'd found this first, this is where I would have gone. Just because the aesthetic really suited me.
Right. Yeah. Now, would you say, Starhawk and Carroll's work are still relevant to you today?
Less Starhawk. Years and years later, I worked with briefly within the Blood Rose tradition of fairy witchcraft, fairy tradition witchcraft, Anderson witchcraft, and a lot of the stuff that I do is based on those first maybe 5 or 6 classes I had before I had a falling out with that teacher. And then again, kind of Carol was the filter for everything for me initially. But the guys that got me were Stephen Mace, whose book "Stealing the Fire from Heaven" was really hugely useful. Though I recently reread it and was like, yeah, I don't agree with much of this anymore, but it's good. It's usable. And Ray Sherwin, the Book of Results, primarily, and something about. And I haven't read the Book of Results in a long time, but something about what Sherwin suggested, I interpreted, and this could be correct or not, I don't know. Like I said, I haven't read it in 20 years. To basically kind of just go where there is power for you and don't be too concerned about the kind of levels of system that are out there. And so I began really, and this was back in the Temple of Psychic Youth days for me. This would have been in 89 or 90 probably. And so at that point I really went, okay, I'm going to just take that as permission to make this look and feel how I want it to. And I'm going to use pieces from anything that I've come across that fits into that kind of overall overarching approach. And I'm going to take what works for me and I'm just going to run with that. And I'm not going to worry about the fact that a ton of stuff that people do in the magical world doesn't make any sense to me. I'm just going to ignore that. I'm not going to try and get that to fit in my thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I think that goes back to your beginnings in chaos magic too.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Definitely.
When you're going around and you're sort of finding what works for you and discarding the things that don't and putting them together in one course of action, do you ever find yourself bumping up against what others might call being too eclectic or even doing cultural appropriation?
You know, since I don't really work with named spirits, hardly at all, I do a little bit of work with Ganesh, and he certainly doesn't seem to care about who uses him. And other than that, it's kind of as close as I get is I have a connection to Woden or Odin that I've had for a long time, which would fit into my background anyway. And to Hecate, which is, we've talked briefly about that, but I have a weird take on Hecate anyway. So, but yeah, so like I don't really deal with Native American stuff. I don't really deal with any of the HER stuff. And that's not based on concerns about cultural appropriation. I have had extensive contact with some of the kind of Vodun deities back in the early 90s. They were really around the chaos magic stuff back then. I don't know if you had that experience, but they were really prevalent. And I think we're just kind of checking us out, is my take. But none of that stuff really stuck. So the cultural appropriation thing, I don't see as being relevant to how I practice.
Yeah, I like to get an idea of what everybody thinks about that. You know, it's something that's going around in our magical societies, different groups and cultures, and you see that thrown around quite a bit. Now, you said you have a weird take on Hecate.
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind explaining that?
Sure. So I've talked about it. I talk about it quite a bit in the book, but I'm not religious. And so when I talk about having interactions with these things, I don't do any worshipful practice. This is why I kind of ended up outside of the neo-pagan scene. That was the first thing that was available to me. Is I was like, I don't really get this. These things are there and you can interact with them. but I couldn't make the translation to turning it into something that was religious. Instead, it's kind of, I think in the book I referenced the plumber, but it's more like I'm a jeweler who's a magician and whose jewelry is all based on that. And someone can come to me and have me do work for them to create a tool for them that will help them. This is essentially what I think is going on with the spirits, that it's a reciprocity. They gain benefit from us. And so that aspect is kind of the first thing to get out there. Hecate showed up to me really early on, and we have had kind of a passing sense of contact. And then when I decided to actually make the jewelry thing my main focus, she is the entity or the spirit that showed up and said, I have a ton of stuff that I want you to make for my people. And began, these things would show up in my dreams. They would show up in all of that stuff. And when I actually kind of approached that and said, I don't quite get why I'm the vehicle here, and the thing that I got shown, and this is again trance and dream stuff over the course of the next little while, was I have a really deep connection to the Weird Sisters, to the Weavers. And again, I view this as a positional thing. So we have the Fates, the Norns, there's other forms of them. And they aren't all the same within the culture so that they come from. There's different stories about them. There's different mythologies. I'm sure if you're a practicing reconstructionist within any field, they're going to show in a very particular way. But what I see is a class of beings that have very similar, they have an area that they cover, and they have specialties that they cover. And so what I was shown was like, Hecate was kind of saying, I'm kind of that thing. And it was really confusing waking up from this kind of vision of this. And I was like, what the heck does that even mean? And then I realized, like, no, this makes sense. These are the three roads. These are the three paths. These are the three faces. This is, that which brings you into this world, the path that you walk on it, and that which takes you out. You go, okay, in what way is this not? It's a singular form of this triune, feminine, birth, life, death, process, goddess thing. And I see more of that, and I see that in a lot of the I see that with her. I see it with Odin and things like that as well. That there's, like, depending on where you approach from, you get something else.
Okay.
If that made sense, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it does. But when you say depending on how you approach, depends on what you get. So are you basically saying that the name or the aspect of that force, whatever they are, is what you're trying to connect with, not necessarily every aspect of their entire being?
Right. In part, that's that. And so, like, even though with what I just said, I have things on the walls in my shop that are specific to the Norns and the Fates, right? I've got focal things for them. And I have an entirely separate section for Hecate, because she's not that, because how she shows to me is not identical to that. Right? So I'm not saying that she is the Fates or she is the Norns or whatever. That's just crap. Sure. But if I were to come from, it's okay. There's an easier person to do this with. It's a relevant one. If we look at the Odin Woden thing, is a little less complex in some ways.
You're the first person to call Odin less complex.
In some ways, but as it relates to this discussion.
Right.
So what we have largely right now that I see, and I'm not deep into a Satra or anything like that, but a lot of what we see is kind of this Odin as father god, as kind of king archetype, as kind of all of those Jupiterian things, with some kind of oddity, because most people will also say, yeah, there's this mercurial aspect, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in general, we get this kind of the other thing that I think you and I talked about with is Odin as a war god is kind of a big thing right now. And I think if you approach with that kind of pre-concept, that absolutely shades what you get when you make contact for most people. It's not true for everyone. And so when people are coming in from kind of a codified mythological base or theological base, you tend to get what you're looking for. For me, that's not how that showed up. I was kind of pre the Asatru boom for my connections into Odin. And what I got was this really way more mercurial than anything Jupiterian. I've never even seen that side of the guy. And it's like this primordial shaman figure, to use a term that some people will get irritated about, but that is kind of like it's this father of sorcery is what I would say. And within that, if we look at the things that are around him, he's also, and this is where the kind of war god thing gets me, is I see him as being crucial within that. You could see that because he's a god of death. Right. If we look at the wolves, if we look at Jerry and Frecky, hungry and greedy, they're the grave. They're not battle, they're death. If we look at Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, those are the things that are gone when you're dead. So to me, he's straight up this kind of psychopomp, bridge between the worlds, hence the world tree being such a crucial thing in that imagery. But so that's what I've always gotten from him, is he's like this super potent magician death god. And the battle aspect is like, sure, how could he not be responsible for that, given that? How could that not be his field? But that's almost like a subset. So it's an interesting thing. But again, I think if I had come from a different mythological base or a different theological base, I would think I would have found something different.
Yeah, that's probably true. I think you're probably closer to the essence of Woden and Odin, the fury, the ecstasy, the power that he represents. But you don't have a religious relationship with these forces. By your own words, right. You have a relationship of reciprocity.
Absolutely.
Where do you see the difference in those two?
So for this one, I have to kind of just go to what I see. I've never had, though I can see that for many people, it's a big thing. Be this in a Christian scenario or an Islamic scenario or in a pagan scenario, but there's an impulse to prayer that I don't have. There's I'm much more inclined to go, you and I have some connection that is relevant to me, and I believe is relevant to you, because why would you have it with me if there wasn't reciprocity? I'm not going to deal with people that there's not some back and forth, right? There's no value to it.
Sure.
And I believe that the spirits are quite as together on that level as we are. And so instead, it's like, this is what I would like to have occur. This is the change I would like in myself or my life. And can we come up with a way to do that? And I'd like your help. And so I don't know if that answers that question, but it's like, I really just don't have that impulse towards prayer. I give thanks, but thanks are pragmatic as well. It's like, no, I give offerings to the things that do work for me. Those can get pretty serious depending on the work. And that's, to me, just like building any other relationship. It's, I have magicians, I can say, I need work done. And they go, great. I do too. And I'm not sure how different this thing is. I think we want to project kind of what is in my mind a way more separate reality to these things sometimes that I think comes from kind of the Abrahamic religions in the last couple thousand years.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. The Judeo-Christian or Abrahamic religious way of thinking is so permeated in our culture, especially in the Western world, that, I mean, even if you're not raised in it, I was never forced into a church. I've never been baptized. It was never my thing, never exposed, although I got curious at one point in my own life, realized it didn't resonate. Even I have elements of what they've instilled in our culture that are deep in my own subconscious thinking that I don't know that we could ever rid ourselves of it.
No, and I think that, to me, that's one of the bigger things that you get to do with magic, right? Is you get to go in and go, in what ways am I fucked up that I don't believe are justified?
Yeah.
And do I have tools, or can I find tools, or do I have allies, or could I find allies or make allies that can help me with that?
Well,
because our cultural indoctrination is shitty out here, I think. So.
Yeah, well, let's get into some of those tools. You talk about them in your book, and this should be a little bit more about magic than relationship with divine forces. So, one thing that you talk about a lot, first of all, is you do get into your view of spirits, and you promote a form of animism, but you don't think your form of animism is quite, now, how did you say it? It's not a perfect picture of reality, or however you worded that. So what is your animistic approach?
I don't know when I kind of stumbled across animism as a concept, but when I did, I was like, oh, this is how I see things. And then I began thinking more on it. To me, I have kind of a biological viewpoint of the world, and this being all worlds. This is the world that we're physically in, and then the worlds that we can pass through. If I have a particular peculiarity, I would say an approach, that's it, is that I have a kind of biological model beyond anything else. And so for me, what animism is saying is that with a lot of theoretical caveats that you could say, does the plastic bottle have a spirit? To which my response that I'm looking at right here, no, it probably doesn't, but it could contain one. Whereas if I throw that out, like my guitar, my Les Paul has a spirit, that there's no doubt about that. And we're surrounded by spirit, is my perception. That this whole, both the physical and the material and the non-material is basically permeated by spirit. And that to me is, in a sense, maybe all the stuff all of the empty space that we are told about exists between things. Maybe that's just spirit. And that most things can be interacted with that way. So I can actually get my guitar to stay in tune more than it does sometimes, if I actually talk to it about that. People will say that's a bunch of shit, and I don't care because it works. And so to me, that animistic approach is just saying, okay, if I'm not actually alone, then who do I have to work with? Who do I have as helpers? Who do I have as friends? Who could I have pissed off in the last week that made my life go to shit? Did I do anything kind of shitty to anyone or anything around me? All of these things can kind of come up within that animistic model. But yeah, so I guess to me is that animism is the basic idea that spirit is everywhere and either and indwells most things, at least most natural things, in potential. I think it's pretty clear that not every rock necessarily has a spirit in it, but a lot of them do.
Sure. Yeah. I'd like to think about that. They're one of my favorite thought exercises. Our water supply that comes into our homes for showers, drinking, cooking, whatever, comes from usually a river. In our case here, where I live, it comes from a very specific river. It's been dammed for a lake and then carries on as a river. And I honor that river spirit regularly. There's 3 major rivers that run through the county I live in, and I regularly make offerings to those rivers. But I sometimes wonder, when I make my offering of gratitude to the water spirits as they run through my house through cleansing rituals, and ending with something like, honoring the water spirits and may peace always be between us. Mm-hmm. That water comes from that same river that I've already been honoring. So are the water spirits that make their way to my home aspects of that major river spirit, or are they their own separate entities? And that, I think, is the fundamental exercise of animism.
Oh, totally. And I think that's really true. So like we've created this environment where we live now. We've only been here for about a year and a third, that is incredibly friendly to the wildlife. So now I can walk outside and the cottontails don't even run away. They're just like, oh, hey, dude, you're the guy who provides the food. And our chickens and our ducks have all interacted, have created like a functional ecosystem with the rabbits and with the other songbirds. So they're all eating out of the same feeders. They're all drinking the same water. And I know that this experience that's happening on this little, 330 by 330 foot square of land that we sit on is not normal for where we live. Because we've changed that scenario, right? We're treating everybody differently. We're not flipped out that the rabbits are going to give us plague. We're not trying to trap them for eating the garden. We're attempting to create a symbiotic relationship with everybody. The volume of just songbirds that exist on our property is probably up by, I don't know, multiple times since we moved in. Because everybody's now like, they've got water, they keep it clean, there's food. And so to me, that kind of, that's an approach that's inherently animistic, even if people don't notice it, which I think a lot of people have. You feed the things that you want around you. You try and discourage the things that you don't want around you. You may not be having an actual conversation with those things, which I do, but that practice itself is animistic. If you ever yell at a machine or your car, you're behaving in an animistic fashion. People will say it's anthropomorphizing. Not really. Yes, in some cases it could be, but really you're actually trying to communicate with your car that you're fucking pissed off that it keeps breaking. You may not be doing this fully consciously, but that's what you're doing. And animism is kind of the logical extension of that. So what happens if instead you were to converse with your car about not breaking down so frequently and asking it what it needs, and it giving you some ideas on things that you can do. And then your car stops breaking down, but you've entered the realms of magic. Like 100%, there's no doubt. That's straight up sorcery. It's straight up animism.
Absolutely. Now, with an animistic worldview and reciprocity being a part of your practice, how do offerings play a role in your magical work?
Well, first I have to thank Jason Miller strategic sorcery course.
I'll second that.
Man, he wins the separate from those traditions that have a heavy operating process, which I was never a part of, award for getting my head straight. Basically, when I found Jason Miller's stuff on offerings, I went, oh, that's why some of my work works and some of it doesn't. It's not about how hard I could focus or whether I could see, the pentagrams spinning widdershins around me or whatever. It was I doing the backup work, which was offering work. And to me, offerings they're like the root way of telling the rest of the world that is around you that is sentient, that you're aware that it's sentient, and you're aware that it has value, and you're aware that your relationship with it is important. And so if you begin the process of making general offerings to the spirits that aid and guard you, which is the thing that I recommend in 6 ways, I don't know anybody that does that with integrity, meaning that they're not going through it just through the motions, but is actually finding what part of that resonates to them as being real and important, that doesn't see this huge uptick in how effective their work is. And for me, what it did was it really shifted how much work I had to do. So most of the work that I do is offerings. I make offerings I'm in my shop, which is my temple as well. So, I've got a couple of folk saints. I've got, Hecate and the Fates, and some, silversmithing and blacksmithing related things in here, and kind of other, mostly crossroads gateway kind of entities, or who I kind of hang with. And they all get offerings on a both continuous and then specific basis, just for hanging out, and where I give them water and food, or if they like particular things, I'll give them those things. I make coffee for a bunch of them. I make chai for some of them. And then within that process, I've also become very comfortable just saying, hey, I need some help with this. This isn't working very well. I need some clarity on this subject. I could use a kick in the ass about this. I could use some help with my self-discipline, or I could use some help with my communication skills with my wife. And that becomes a huge portion of the ritual. It kind of almost replaces ritual work in most cases for me. So that's the offerings. If that's the sell for the offerings, if I was going to try and sell you on offerings, which I am.
Now, is your offering practice daily, weekly? I mean, you've got specific spirits and entities you have a relationship with, but is there a general offering to just different classes of beings that you do on a regular basis?
I do the kind of version of what's in 6 ways of I make offerings to the spirits that aid and guard me, and I make offerings to the spirits of the crossroads to open roads for me every day. I walk into the shop, I bring in sometimes 3 different cups of coffee and tea, one for me and the rest for them. I light the candles for them. I consecrate the candles for them. I do all that stuff. I do specific kind of familial ancestors once a week. And I do the folk saints once a week. I mostly work with Cyprian and Mashimon. And they each they get special treats on a particular day for them.
And a lot of people may hear the word offerings and they've heard them before. They may have read about them before, but something that never really gets addressed. And I see this come up a lot in questions in online discussions. What do you do with the offerings once you think they've accomplished their job? How long do they stay out? how do you discard of them?
It super depends. For me, some of the guys that I work with or things that I work with mainly get things like hard candies. And so that's just when they don't go bad. They don't attract bugs or anything. So since I'm no longer in Tennessee, they don't attract bugs. And those go, just kind of when the mood hits me, I'll look up there and go, "You want some fresh candy? Cool. Let me get rid of this and I'll get you some candy." The coffee and the tea goes every day because otherwise it gets kind of nasty. I don't do a lot of straight up food offerings in the shop because the shop is so tiny. But when I did, I would take that outside and stick it where the critters could get it outside. Mashimon, if he's particularly good, he gets eggs and tortillas and things like that. And so those just go outside and I let the critters eat them. I just think be respectful about it. Ask them if it's cool to take them before you take them. Because otherwise it's kind of like somebody grabbing your plate while you still have half the steak on it. And you might be.
That's true. Now, moving on from offerings, you've written about trance being one of your tools in your life. How do you utilize trance? In fact, how would you define trance?
For me, there's a lot of different kinds of trance. And so, like when I was doing long distance running, I would enter a particular kind of trance, after about 15 miles. But that's not really what I talk about in the book. And so I guess we could just define as being magical trance, and we'll just use that for now. And so for me, the magical trance is about dropping into alternative reality, into non-ordinary reality, and then doing work or having experiences in that space. So that can be, people do a lot of shamanic journeying with drums and things like that. I don't do that. I can't really use music for the way that I work. So to me, what I do is it's a straight up self-hypnosis induction into a very deep, relaxed space. And then I have a series of locations that I can travel to that are kind of central hubs for different things that I do. So like there's a lake that I go to for particular kinds of work. And there is kind of a temple in the woods that I go to that is like where I go for a particular kind of work. In 6 ways, I give like an introduction to a watchtower that I use. And once I'm in there, then I can either do work in that space or travel from that space or interact with the beings that are most easily connected with in those spaces. Yeah.
Okay.
Again, I'm not sure I don't know if that answered that question or not, but
yeah, no, close enough. And would trance be your preferred method of spirit contact or communication, divination?
Yeah. Yeah, to me, I mean, if I were to like break it down, my practice down, I do a few things. I do offering work. I do kind of sigil magic and candle magic, which are often the same thing for me. My entire jewelry practice is a magical practice, start to finish. And then I do trance work. I do very little ritual that would look like a ceremonial ritual, or kind of more involved spell work, because all of that happens in trance. I used to be an insomniac, and I learned how to actually sleep using trance induction techniques. But I still tend to wake up in the middle of the night, almost every night. And I wake up, I get up, I use the bathroom, I lie down, and I put myself in trance. And I go work from anywhere from an hour to 3 hours. And then I go to sleep, and then I get up and have my day. So yeah, almost all my spirit contact that isn't happening in the shop when I'm at the bench, because that happens a lot, is happening in the trance spaces. I don't really do much mechanical divination. I do some pendulum work and a little bit of cards, but not much. And so, yeah, if I have questions, I go in there and I go find my allies and go, what's up with this? What do I do about this? How do I change this? Can I change this? Should I change this? What the fuck is going on? And what can we do to make it better?
Great. Trance is good for all those things. I think I don't know. I kind of think it's a neglected practice. I'm a professional hypnotist, so I'm always on board with people who utilize trance for good purposes.
Mm-hmm.
What?
Well, I think
go ahead.
Well, I think it's super interesting because for me, I know that I didn't come in to the trance work through the kind of guided visualization that I see a lot of it gets kind of set up through the magical stuff that I've read. In that I go in and I am aware that there are potential allies, but I don't go in looking to meet a specific entity. And so this has meant that I've spent sometimes years wandering around in particular spaces that have been interesting enough to kind of maintain my interest before something actually has kind of shown and said, okay, you're not fucking around because you keep coming here. So what is up? And those things, I don't know what they are. I think I talk about that in the book, that most of the spirits that I interact with don't have names or won't give names, or mostly I stopped asking. I mean, I don't need to know their names. I know where they are, and they either come or they don't. Then in that space we do work, and a lot of that is it's what I think of as body work, but it's of course happening on the more astral side or whatever. And so that work to me is hugely important because there's so much change that can happen on incredibly deep levels that a lot of the kind of theater of ritual doesn't touch to me. It's really different for me to go in or to create a ritual to contact a spirit, have it manifest to some degree in a space that I'm in, and then we can have something like a conversation, versus me being able to go more into a neutral ground or its home turf where I can say, what's going on? And it can say, let me show you, and essentially put itself into my body or part of itself into my body and move things around. And that's, to me, the real incredible beauty of trance work, is that you can have these, for lack of a better term, kind of soul-changing experiences that aren't really predicated on trying to get a specific thing done, but more what does the system need, being me and my immediate environment, because I'm really aware as well that I'm an important part of my immediate environment, and so if I'm not well, that environment is probably not as well as it could be, and that those changes all work way better in the trance world than anywhere else, in my experience.
How do you view the soul? You've mentioned it more than once, so do you have a specific way of viewing that?
I think that there's anything that's sentient, which I hope we are, has something like a soul, is what I would say. And I don't know that that's the best word for it, but I kind of use soul to differentiate kind of the individual spirit from the spirit worlds. But yeah, there is a kind of crucial part to self that exists, and that's what I call the soul.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was getting at, because there are a lot of different models of soul out there. I work with an idea of a soul complex made up of different parts.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't have one that I'm stuck on about that. I'm pretty open about what goes on there. I'm just aware that it's there, and that it's multi-part. I would agree that it's multi-part. I think that's pretty evident from what I've seen. But it's yeah. I mean, my son died recently in November of last year, and when he was on life support, and before I could get out to see him, I was able to visit him through trance. And it was super clear that the majority of who he was had already moved on. So like I knew at that point when I had that experience, I'm like, okay, he's gone from the physical. But then he was still on life support when I got out to where he was. And there was also some of him there. And it was a different part, you know. And it's not like he'd been split up or something. This was a natural thing. Like the part that was mainly the body was still there. Which kind of cemented what I'd experienced before. But so to me, that concept of a soul complex is a good one. Though I'm not sure specifically, as I talk about the general and the specifics are going to matter in certain circumstances. But I think generally it's true that the soul is a kind of multi-part thing.
Well, as a parent myself, let me extend my condolences for your loss. I didn't know about that. With something so tragic, how does that affect the entire ecology of your practice?
It really deepened everything. And it did on a few levels. And I think I talked about this on a Hermit's Lamp podcast that Andrew had me and Fabiku on a little bit ago. That about 2 years before Ash died, I met a whole new collection of beings in the West, in the other worlds, and their whole function is about dying and passing on. And I learned a ton about that from them leading up to this. And about 3 weeks before he passed, and this was a sudden thing, his heart just stopped. About 3 weeks leading up to that whole interaction became like 100 times more intense. Like they went from I would show up sometimes and they would show me something to we have a bunch of stuff to show you. And we're going to show it to you right now. And this was night after night after night after night of really incredibly intense work around death and dying. And so when I got the news that he was in, critical care, and that his heart had stopped, but that they had started again, but that he was not responsive, I went in and those entities were all there. And they were like, for lack of another way to say it, they were all like, we're really sorry, but you need to go find him and we'll help you. And so it's an incredibly strange experience as well as being horrible. And what it really did was it made me realize that there's so much stuff that goes on in our magical practices and in our magical lives that if we're really invested is super interlaced in ways that we can't really comprehend. I mean, that doesn't make any sense from a time perspective, right? Why would these things show up 3 weeks beforehand and kind of go, we're going to get you ready so you can do what you need to do? So yeah, it's deepened everything just massively. And I'm also an emotional wreck, as one would expect. I'm way more raw than I've ever been in my life post that. And, just trying to find what ground is like now, because it's very different.
No, I can imagine. That was a very trying time, and many people go through something like that, and it can either shatter or deepen their worldviews. And I think you touched on this earlier in our conversation that what else as magicians could we do than find the areas where we've been hurt or fucked up and do something about it.
Right. Well, I think Genesis Peorage and the Temple of Psychic Youth for me finding them when I was 15, because that was one of the things that they really talked about, though not in that language. But they were really clear, like we're programmed in this but we're programmed by the culture and by the society and by the family that we're raised in. And it behooves us to question whether we like that and whether we want that. And if we don't, to change it and make something or find something different. And I think that's always been a really prevalent aspect of magic to me.
Yeah, you did talk about something in your book. I don't remember the exact wording of it, but I remember I sent you a picture of that part of the book saying, as I was reading along, and said, I think might be the most important thing you touched on. And it deserves that kind of credit. And where you talk about the people or even the spirits or the things that you allow in your life being the biggest influence on you, and you need to be careful about what you allow in.
Right. Well, that I'm kind of an isolated person in some ways anyway. When I finally got out of like living in the city and living in kind of group housing, I realized how influenced I'd been by everybody around me. And that this is also true on the spirit level. My litmus test is if I roll in and the spirits are bitches, I don't deal with them. Because there's a lot of those out there. They want everything. They want things that are not necessarily good for the person that they're trying to get them from. And this is what I think a lot of people work with, because they're really tactile. They're really palpable. They're flashy. There's a lot of bang to it. And so to me, the thing that kind of that part of the book is really talking about is everything working better? Or at least if, and this doesn't mean like I'm going through stuff right now that is absolutely triggered by my magical work that is unpleasant, but it's going to drop me on the other side of that in way better shape than I was when I started. So I'm not talking about that, but if you're consistently getting kind of shit results in any aspect of your life, you should look at what surrounds you and what you allow in, both internally and externally. Where does your mind go? Because you can retrain your mind to go to different places if it's going to places that are consistently not helpful for you. Magically, who's actually helping you? There's a lot of really great boo scary entities and deities out there that are really fun to work with because they're so intense. But you may find that isn't actually improving things for you. And so I think that's a huge thing that people kind of often miss.
I agree. Obviously, I said it was one of the most important points of your book. What would you say is an unusual habit or even something outsiders might call absurd about your magical work?
Oh, man. It depends on how outside they are.
Yeah.
I talk like I'm talking to you now to the entities that I work with. I will totally no bullshit walk into the shop and make an offering to one of my spirits and go, dude, everything is fucked. And I'm not down. So what is up? And how do we fix it? I pretty much talk to my spirits like I'm a surfer dude.
Yeah, that's okay. It beats being sort of condescending. You'll see this a lot with people who are doing paranormal investigations.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be exploring a haunted location, and they're trying to get an answer on an EVP recorder. Of course, they can't see what's going on around them. They don't know for sure if there's a spirit presence, and they'll start asking questions like they would a small child.
Right.
You'd be like, instead of saying, is there anyone here that would like to speak to me? You'd be like, is there anyone here? Are you really there?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And I think that, that's the other suggestion I would have for anybody that's doing magic that is not getting the results that they want, which is, can you make it as normal as possible? Which is, can you be yourself as you really are in the work that you do? And that, I think, generally produces just radical results. We have this kind of Hollywood view of magic. And sometimes it's like the trick is, and you'll see this, it's in a ton of books, that like you should intone everything in a really deep and sonorous voice. And that works for some people. It never really did for me. But yeah, can you walk in and just go, I'm a wreck. I want this. I want this because I want it. I want a really fancy car. I have no good reason other than the fact that it would be really rad if I had a Ferrari. That is way more likely to work than trying to make it all fancy and highfalutin. In my experience, I just see that's, if you can get real with the spirits, if you can get real with yourself, you're good. Because I don't think that they're running off of something other than normal perception anyway. So if these things don't have ears, it's more about how clear you are than how cool you sound.
Absolutely agreed. Yeah. With all that said, everything we've covered, what do you think about hauntings?
I've been places that are haunted. I lived across the street from someplace that was super whack. And I'll just tell people where it is, because a bunch of people will know if they lived around there. If you lived in San Francisco and you were at the corner of Haight Street and Divisadero, there were two corner stores on opposite corners. And I don't know, I haven't been back there in a long time. And then on one of the corners was Phuket Thai. And on that fourth corner was a brick wall and a billboard, and people would fight there. Crazy people would fight with themselves. Guys and girls would fight. Strangers would fight. The Temple of Psychic Youth was set up above that Thai restaurant, and we would watch out that window on kind of, Saturday nights, and you could watch the fights happen. And it was absolutely specific to that place. And you could take people to that place that didn't know about it and watch them get irritated and angry. I once, a friend of mine had met somebody who claimed to be psychic, highly psychic, and they just didn't know whether they believed them or not. And I didn't know how to figure it out. And then I'd gone to see a show at the Fillmore, and I remembered that next to the Fillmore, also on Divisadero, but quite a ways away, or no, on Fillmore, not Divisadero, was the Korean Lutheran Church. And the Korean Lutheran Church was formerly the People's Temple of Jim Jones fame.
Oh.
And I was like, I bet if I bring somebody who's really psychic and have a chat with them out in front of the old People's Temple building, they will want to leave. I was 19 or something, or 20 at the time. And so, yeah, we met up to eat at some restaurant near there. And then we walked up the street, and I stopped, and I don't know whether I leaned up against the fence or sat on the steps or whatever to have a cigarette. And we were there for about 90 seconds. And this woman was like, can we get the fuck out of here? Because I don't know what is wrong with here, but there's something horribly wrong with here. Okay, you're a psychic. So I know that stuff happens. I've seen ghosts. I had something that is very akin to a Men in Black experience when I was younger. So
you can't just say that and not tell me about it.
Oh man, my friend Samantha, who will probably listen to this, was the first witch I met. And the way that we got close was we worked at a bookstore together, and I was 17, and I walked up to her one day and said, what can you tell me about the Men in Black? And she was like, okay, we have a special one. Yeah, I didn't know anything about them. And we were all, at that time, high school age. taken a lot of acid in the hills out behind our high school. And there were multiple experiences where people would spot individual or pairs of these men in black suits off in the distance in the hills out there, which this is like cow country out there. This is not where the guys in the black suits would hang out with their ties. And I never saw them, but I was asked about it, and I made plans to go out there. And I walked down to the laundry room of the apartment building we were in, and there was one in the laundry room. And I froze. I couldn't move, and he just faded away. And that was the only experience I had with him, but that's what led me to ask Sam about the Men in Black, which probably is another thing that led me towards practicing magic.
So you see not only one of the Men in Black, but you see it as a ghost.
I saw it as solid, but then it faded out over the course. It took about 60 seconds or 70 seconds for it to go from being fully solid to being not there.
That's curious. Yeah.
It was really weird. It took a long time. That was the thing that was freaky, was like, it took a really long time.
Huh. Yeah, that is curious. So, I mean, so you've got some experience with some haunted locations. You're aware that these phenomena happen.
Mm-hmm.
As a practicing and skilled, experienced magician,
mm-hmm.
if someone approached you and said, I'm pretty sure my house is haunted, I'm not sure what to do about it, they've eliminated all the normal mundane possibilities, how would you go about helping them?
My first question is, do you have magicians living next door to you or above you?
Great question.
Because that's the other story I have. So this is, I hope we aren't running too long here, but
absolutely not.
So there was a point there, in the beginning of the book, one of the dedications is to the Black Squid cult. And the Black Squid cult, some of whom are still around, they're excellent. You may have read some of their work, but I'm not going to drag them into this. The Black Squid cult is a name we kind of jokingly came up with for this group of magicians and interested people who met in my apartment, my flat, for quite a long time. And we would do a kind of freeform sorcery, both there, and then we would wander the streets and do stuff. And at this point in time, my brother reached out to me and said, I have a friend who is having poltergeist activity in their house. Would you be willing to help them out? I said, sure, I would be totally willing to help them out. That sounds cool. We could have a party. I asked him a couple of weeks later, and I said, so is that going to happen? I was really into it. And he was like, she's just going to move. It's so weird at her place. She's going to move. I said, okay. And I think I saw him in person when he told me, and he said, okay. He goes, so you know that friend of mine with the poltergeist activity? And this was like water coming out of the phone. Like, it was absurd. It's like literally Hollywood shit, apparently, with multiple witnesses. He said, I said, yeah. And he goes, she lived in the flat underneath you.
Really?
And so we were like, we didn't know there was a flat underneath us. So we had actually done really good work to seal off everybody else. So I think we were just pumping it straight down into her zone, but, or whatever, but, who knows what else was there. It could have been that we reified, helped to reify something that was already there as well. I'm not saying we did it, but I'm sure we fueled it. In general, the ones that we've seen, or the ones that I've had experience with, a lot of the times you can totally chill shit out with offerings. you can often go, what's up? Are you here because you want to be here, or are you here because you're stuck? Because if you're stuck, I can unstick you. If you're here because you want to be here, if you're willing to like not freak out everybody that comes into the house or torment the children while they're sleeping or whatever, we could work something out. And I've had both those things work. Yeah, it just depends on what somebody's after. I think that things that are like long-term, enduring violence and fear kind of entities are much harder to deal with than anything else. But I would say that that's kind of a minimal number of the actual things that I've ever come across. Most of those things you can kind of go, hey, what's up? If you stop slamming the doors at night, I'll give you a cup of coffee every day.
Right. No, you're absolutely right.
And that's usually because often they just want attention, right? So you go, here, we can have that. We can set up a little space for you. This is your candle. This is your incense. This is your cup of coffee. It's like, okay, so now you've got a house spirit. That's cool. You go, can you flip the shit out of anybody that tries to rip me off? That would be a great time to slam doors and be terrifying.
That's an excellent thought. Yeah. I'm sad to say I never thought of it that way. At least not could you flip the shit out of anybody trying to break into my house? I've done all the other stuff. That's fine. That's the way I handle it.
Yeah, but, totally. Well, I do think that one of the things that we tend to do is we tend to try and get rid of persistent energies and entities, sometimes prematurely. And sometimes we interpret things like my wife can say some things to me that I will interpret as being hostility. And they aren't. It's just we have totally different communication styles. And vice versa. I can say things to her that are just, if she doesn't interpret, if we don't interpret for each other, and we don't dig in, it's just wrong. It's purely wrong information. There's information there, but the interpretation is totally screwed. And so, a lot of the times, if you do have house spirits or things like that, it's seeing, can you change the manifestation? And I talk about it in relationship to servitors, but it goes way beyond that in the book, which is a lot of these things are very much like people are like working dogs, right? And, idle hands, devil's playground and all that stuff. And so if you can give them a job, it will often correct tons of stuff. And this is also really good for people who are working with spirits but aren't asking for them to do work for you. That can get funky because it's like, it's kind of like, you keep calling me up and I keep coming over, but you never try anything. What's up with that? And it can get weird. And so, kind of on that same ballpark is, it's totally legit to ask the spirits around you, like, will you help out with this? Will you watch the house? Will you make the house invisible to people that would like to bring problems to it? Would you tell me when there are people who are coming into the house whose intentions are not good?
Yeah, I like it.
That's a really useful thing if you can get that.
Right.
They know what's, we can be stupid. We're pretty easily deceived. But so if you got something that doesn't care that guy is hot or that girl is beautiful or whatever, then they might go, no, you don't want this in the house. This is not going to be good for you.
Along those lines, for years before I go to bed every night, I have specific wards and protection things that I do at the entryways of my home before I go to bed. It's just a practice. It's quick, it's easy, it's efficient.
Yep.
And it works. But after reading your book, I've added something to it that I never thought of before. Just like after I finish doing those, when I go to the doors themselves, I like to thank the door for being the threshold. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, the subtle changes I've noticed since then. but that came straight out of your book.
Absolutely. That's a huge one for me, is when I had that realization that I could get that kind of granular with the process, right? Like, and this is kind of why there's so little ritual in 6 Ways specifically. Is it's more like, what can you bring to all the things you already do to improve that communication and improve that positive feedback loop to kind of swing everything in the direction that you're looking for. Because that to me is such a key. That was the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing I ever learned, was like, oh yeah, no, that whole stupid thing about, I think I talk about it in the candle section, which I'm sure came from some old witchcraft book, creature of iron. I inscribe this creature of wax with this sigil for this end. I anoint it with this oil for this end, and ask all of those pieces to assist. Again, it's just communication, and it just jacks the clarity up through the roof, instead of how do I come up with the perfect, cool sounding statement of intent. Right? It's like, don't worry about that. Just get really clear on every step what you're doing, and then just reiterate the fuck out of that shit day in and day out.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Let's go back to that spirit in the house real quick before I let you get on about your day. Let's say a spirit in the haunted house, the friend gets a hold of you. The spirit wants unstuck. You offered to unstick it. How do you do that?
I've done it in a bunch of ways. The most consistent way is using crystals as spirit traps. And just explaining, again, going in clear without anybody around that isn't on my same wavelength, because people can get freaky, and you don't want mixed messaging. So if you're comfortable doing it yourself is gonna be clearer than doing it with other people. And rolling in and going, okay, here's how I can get you out of here. I could get, if you're willing to move from whatever matrix you're stuck in here into this matrix, we can then take you somewhere else. And that's worked very well. And sometimes it's kind of, without going too much onto a tangent, but it is a tangent that's really not in the book, that probably should have been, but it'll be in the next one. One of the concepts that's really big for me is about permission. And so some of what 6 Ways is about permission to have a really open approach to magic, and really looking at it on a depth rather than a complexity level, right? The spirits, there's spirits all around us that are trying to influence things, and part of what happens magically is we begin to give them both direction and permission. We're giving explicit permission to, say, in my case, my ancestors and my allies, to get involved with my life. When we're dealing with trapped spirits, sometimes what they need is permission to leave, is to have somebody come in, because they get stuck in kind of what I tend to think of as kind of energy loops or energy swirls, where they're running a program. And you've probably seen this, you play with this stuff, where they do the same thing, right? You hear the doors slam every night 3 times, right? This is a stuck loop. This person this being is running the same program over and over again. And so sometimes you can come in and go, do you want to be doing this? And if you don't, I'll sit with you and help you not do that. I will stay up with you, and we will not do that. We'll not be opening the doors. We'll not be closing the doors. We'll wedge all the doors open. And some of it is just going like, I understand that important things happen here, but you don't have to be here. You can walk away. And again, sometimes you actually have to move something out. But those would be the two kind of, see if it'll get into a crystal and you can take it somewhere else. And see if just giving it permission to leave is okay. Again, I don't think anybody can do that necessarily, but I think a lot of people can. There's definitely something, when I talk in the beginning of 6 Ways about kind of special skills and talents, one of those things that I think comes up from kind of serious, kind of deep practice is that you begin to get taken seriously by things on the other side.
Yes.
And I was going to say, I'm sure you've had that experience. That's the biggest difference 30 years in than in the first year of work that I did. In the first year of work that I did, everybody was pretty tentative about what was going on. Like, you might be legit, you might be serious, you might be whatever. And now I don't have anything like that. It's like things may not work with me, but it's pretty clear that like, no, he's going to do what he says he's going to do. And he's willing to do what he says he's going to do. And is, the third piece, which is, I don't recommend, but will make sense to some people again, is you can transmute a lot of things through your body if you're wired properly. And so I would say you probably already know if you're wired properly. This isn't one of those things I would suggest anybody go and try. But if this makes sense, what I've learned from possession is, whether intentional or unintentional, is that there's space within this being that I call Aidan for more than just this being. And so I can also let things ride that, right? That's the process of intentional possession. So I've been around spirit entities that are stuck or trapped that I can just go, get on board. You can hop on in and we'll just walk out of here. Now, I wouldn't suggest this if there was any sense of, I don't know if I could do that, or this doesn't feel good. If anything like that, no. When I've done that, I've been 100% present, sober, crystal clear, like this is not a problem. And that's worked very well. It's also how I've dealt with some of the really nasty possessions that I had. Was like, okay, you want control of my body? Get in here. Let's play. Because I'm way more in here than you will ever be. And those things want in. That's their game, right? We're going to see if we can terrify you into some little corner, and then we can run the show for a while. And it's like, you can get in here, but I'm not terrified of you. So you can do that, but you won't be here for long.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say it that way, because I mean, just because I saw the other day, oh man, maybe it was on the Daily Grail. The Catholic Church is reporting an increase in the call for exorcisms. And I found that curious and odd for them to release news like that. But here you are talking about these, you deal with those angrier or more negative possessions by saying, get in here. I'm more in here than you'll be. And that seems like the best form of exorcism there ever could be.
And to me, that was my experience. It's like, it's kind of like, I have a crazy friend that was special forces, and his whole house is like stacked with weapons, but you can't see any of them. So like, if you ask, somebody breaks into the house and, sit down on the couch, like, dude, you just gave him the shotgun and the, the K-bar knife. There is nowhere in this house you can put this guy that he's not going to be able to reach over and grab a weapon. Right. And that was my take the first time that happened. It's like, okay, you're trying to get me out of my body. That's just stupid. You can come in here with me, and let's play. And you could tell it had it couldn't resist, because that's what it was trying to do so bad. And it could tell it was fucked. It was the weirdest experience. And it took me a day and a half to get it completely out of me, but it could tell. You could just feel it. It was like, oh no, I'm walking through that door. It's like, yeah, you are. And this should be really interesting. But I knew it would be no problem. I knew it was like, okay, this is going to be work, but it'll be fine. And so again, nothing I would play with without that total absolute certainty. But it's a legit approach.
Yeah. And it goes back to what you said, there's a big difference between what you would have done in year 1 versus year 30. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the biggest differences for me is from year 1 to, well, not year 30 yet, year 20 something.
Mm-hmm.
I find myself in places or near people or connecting to people that really make more sense, or where I need to be a lot easier than I used to.
Right. Well, I think everything gets clearer. I mean, we've talked about that with like Jan Fries for me. Like when I read Visual Magic, I was like, oh, first completely sane occultist. Now, this may not be everybody's take on Jan Fries, but that was mine. Like, I was like, okay, like this is like home, and that became a filter that I was able to use. He kind of took the place of everything else as far as a filter went. But, and this is, again, I think the downside of the information age is like total information overload. And I tended to repeatedly put up a little video from Ido Portal where he says, basically, this is not at all verbatim, but he basically says, like, information becomes toxic at a certain point. It no longer helps you. It no longer leads to progress. And this is unfortunately the kind of internet magic age, right? And this is, again, why 6 Ways is so much just about depth on practices rather than a lot of practices or a lot of theory. And it's not suggesting you should do everything the way that is in the book, but it's like, you don't need to know everything about occultism to practice magic. You don't need to know hardly anything about occultism to practice magic. You just have to come up with a few things that work for you and go as deep as you can on that. And it's like the guy who goes to, 6 martial arts studios and goes to one every day. And gets his ass handed to him by the, guy that's been doing, jujitsu for 6 months. Because that guy has been doing it. He's after one thing. He knows what he wants, right? He's totally clear. Like, no, I want to get a hold of you. Right. It's like back in the day, UFC, it was Hoist Gracie against everybody, right?
Right.
It's like, yeah, everybody else, you want to knock him out, you want to kick him, you do whatever. Hoist just wants to get a hold of you, and then he's going to strangle you.
Yep.
And this totally worked until everybody realized, like, oh, we have to come up with a way to work around that, and it still works. This is, half of the UFC fights that you see are still that. And so this depth thing is really important. Like, you don't need a lot of tools. You don't need to know how to do everything. You need to find what resonates with you and get as good at it as you can, which is just about practice and repetition.
Absolutely. Well, Aidan, I've taken up quite a bit of your afternoon. I think it's time that we call what I hope is just part 1 of this interview a wrap. If I haven't covered anything, is there a topic maybe you wanted to touch on that I haven't gotten to? What would it be?
Oh, man. I think we kind of talked on it, but I mean, the other thing that sinks into this same thing so well is like, for anybody that's kind of practicing magic, to me, the thing that is really helpful is think symbiosis. Assume that what you're doing is that reciprocal thing, and to try and be of benefit to the entities that you work with or the spirits that you work with, and understand that they aren't necessarily really like us. So like you said, like the door thing, like if when you ward your house, talk to your windows and your doors about what they go on. This is a symbiotic relationship. They feed off of this. It's not that you have to be doing something in specific for them. Like most people, it's like they just want to be noticed and acknowledged. And when this happens, it builds up this feedback loop that leads to, in my experience, really great success.
That's awesome. Yeah, and you do cover that in the book. Everyone out there, please run to your nearest bookstore, Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, your favorite place to get books. Get 6 Ways, Approaches and Entries for Practical Magic by Aidan Wachter. I've read it myself. I've dog-eared the shit out of this thing. I could never resell it if I wanted to. It's a book. It's a book in my massive library that I will reference over and over again and promise to recommend and even give as a gift. You've written an absolute must-have text on magic, my friend. In fact, like I told you in messages before, if this is the book I wanted so badly when I got started.
Well, that was absolutely what my intention was once I got going. I wasn't sure what it was going to be, and it really became clear that that was the goal. Is I wanted something that would work for people who had been at this as long as I have, but maybe haven't come to the same places that I have. But I also wanted a book that somebody could start with. The only other thing I'll throw out there is you can only get it online right now. I am months behind, as anybody that has looked at my jewelry site knows. I'm like 4 months shipping right now or something insane. And so I just haven't done any work to get it into bookstores, and I don't even know what that process will entail. So it's available pretty much anywhere online you can buy books, but we'll see if I can actually get enough time to come up with a wholesale approach.
All right. Well, for everyone out there who's interested in your jewelry, which I highly recommend checking out, your writing, and just in generally getting to know you, or perhaps those local metaphysical new age bookstores want to put your books on the shelf, how do they get a hold of you?
Just aidanwachter.com is the website and the blog. I'm on Facebook. If you just want the jewelry stuff, that's Aidan Wachter Talismanic Jeweler. My personal one is just Aidan Wachter, and that's where you get lots and lots of heavy stoner rock, as well as the talismanic jewelry. But I'm on Instagram and Twitter. It's all under Aidan Wachter.
Awesome. I think I keep saying your last name wrong. Do I keep saying Watcher? I'll have to go back through and see.
Oh, yeah, totally. That's okay. It doesn't matter to me. It means the same thing.
I have dyslexia in the middle of a word.
It's pretty common. It's really funny. No, it doesn't bother me.
Well, my apologies if I did so anyway. Thank you again for being here, Aidan. This has been an absolute joy. And for everyone out there who's tuning in, thank you as well. Stay weird out there, my friends.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, gang, that's a wrap on this episode of Weird Web Radio. Once again, thank you all for listening. Now, it's time for you to go join the official Weird Web Radio membership. Go to patreon.com/weirdwebradio and you can choose your rewards and become a member today. Enjoy all the exclusive benefits, inside information, and plenty of bonus audio with each guest. Now, you can find the show at weirdwebradio.com and weirdwebradio.libsyn.com. The show is listed on Facebook and Twitter as Weird Web Radio, and you can find me on Instagram as just Lonnie_Scott. Please remember to rate and comment and share the shows that you like, and it helps others find us in all the search results. Shoot me an email if you want to be a guest on the show, or if you know someone that would be a great guest in upcoming episodes. You can send that to weirdwebradio@gmail.com. Seek the mysteries and delights in life, my friends. As always, stay weird out there.